Are we in? Let's go from now. Hello.
Hello.
That was a big breath in. That was
Hello.
like
Oh God.
sucking
Not
noise
you
of like.
again. Oh, here we are again. No, it was a breath of preparation, not exasperation or boredom.
A breath of preparation is
A
definitely
breath of preparation.
going to be someone's autobiography.
Mine.
Is it yours?
Yeah, from when I'm like famous.
Oh, I feel like it's not that you're not at this level, but like I feel like it's a Dalai Lama book.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know, that level of kind of someone who has spent their life somehow convincing people that they need to teach them how to breathe.
Yeah.
That breathing isn't a thing that
Breathe in the
humans
trees.
do.
Yeah, breathe in the trees, but in the correct way.
In the correct way, thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shinrin Yoko, Shinrin Yoko, and special breathing, and I'll be the goddess of that, and then I'll be rich, and then yeah, that's what I'm spending my lockdown doing right now. It's like planning
Breathing.
my breathing, multi-million pound empire.
I see. Well, it's good to have a project.
Yeah. Don't waste this opportunity, man. Grab it.
If there's any way I can tag along on your coattails, I'll be very happy.
I'm afraid there's no room on my coattails.
No.
Yeah, you can. You can do.
Sniffing. Can I do sniffing?
No, you can do mindful toileting. I'll do the breathing, and you do the evacuation, the bodily evacuation.
Yeah, I think you've missed a trick there, because I think if I positioned myself as some sort of guru who was advocating for like screen-free toilets and like just use that time, it's built, it's how many minutes a day could you be doing, and everybody takes their phone to the toilet anyway, and it's disgusting and germy. Like, I think you've actually given me a better one than breathing.
Do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it solves more of a problem.
You might be right.
You may have shot yourself in the foot there.
Maybe. Yeah.
Is it raining where you are?
Yes.
Raining today, or I feel like the first time in about 2 weeks, and it has definitely. I was talking to my wife earlier that like I'd be interested to see how many people's perception of social isolation, social distancing, and lockdown changes, because we've got rain now forecast for the best part of a week, and it's very different being inside but being able to go for your garden, and that your walk for once a day is like a very joyous hour out in the countryside. But I think there'll be a lot of people now.
Definitely there are. Yeah, I've had messages from people saying this is really, I'm really feeling it today. And I really wanted to go outside anyway. The kids woke up really, really early this morning for some reason, and I just like opened the door and just stood kind of half in and half out of the house, just like smelling it and listening to it, and it was really, really nice. And I was like, I want to go out and play in the rain, but nobody wanted to join me, and I had to look after my kids, so I couldn't. But I really wanted to go out in the woods and be in the rain. Made me miss work. It really did.
Well, there's two ways of looking at it, isn't there? Because I think for some people, that it being rainy would make them more okay about like, I'm just curling up and watching TV and script. That's a more natural thing to do. So you might feel a bit. We're talking again about the people that aren't working. I'm very aware that there are lots of people working, and.
But even those people that are working, I think, it just affects your mood, doesn't it? The outside weather, definitely. You can kind of kid yourself that you're on some kind of weird holiday, I think, even if you are working at home. I'm just basing this on my other half and his colleagues, who I was listening to their work meeting today, and this is what they were all saying.
Oh, have you heard your husband say anything that you realised that he's a different person at work? I saw something about someone saying that they heard their partner say, "We'll circle back to that," and she did it. She was like, "I don't know who you are. Who the hell is
this?" Not especially. Although usually he goes and works downstairs in the living room, and then today was like, "Oh, it's all cold and miserable in there. I don't want to. I'll just sit in the rocking chair in the corner of the bedroom." And I sat. The kids were playing amazing games downstairs, and I sat on the bed and just read my book. And he was on this work call, and And then at the end of it, he was like, "Oh, I felt really self-conscious there, and I really needed to be quite harsh to somebody, and I felt like I couldn't because you would have heard me, and you would have been really like upset with me, or So yeah, someone hadn't done the work they said they were going to do, and he was supposed to give them a bit of a talking to, and he said he just couldn't do it because I was listening, and I was like, I wasn't even listening, I was just reading my book. But yeah, I shamed him into being a nicer person, so that's great. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. That's another job for you. Just
yes.
Some sort of, I don't know. Although maybe he could just take a picture of you, around.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Well, from you reading your book to the thing that we're going to talk about in this podcast.
Yes.
I listened to it. Did you listen to it? Or did you read it?
I listened to the Storytelling Animal book.
Yes.
But I didn't get all the way through, as I said to you, because then my attention was stolen by another book on a kind of similar theme, also storytelling theme, called Therapeutic Storytelling. And I've had it for a long time on bookshelf and kind of dipped in and out. But then I thought, now is the time for reading a book about therapeutic storytelling. So I have read a fair bit of that. So I thought we could talk about
I think this might be a first that I have read a book that you haven't even finished. Like normally you are a lot more prepared for the podcast than I am, and I feel like I think so. But today, saying that, I have finished the book.
Yes,
but again,
and I haven't
finished it a while ago. So I'm going to try and find some notes that I wrote.
Tell us who it's by.
Oh, yes.
When it was written, if you know that.
All of that gubbins. I do. This is one of the advantages of not being in the woods. Is I've got two screens in front of me to look stuff up on and to see my notes. Whereas when we're in the woods, I cannot be bothered to look things up on my phone. So I just go, it's by someone or something.
Yeah, it's a thing.
It is by Jonathan Gottschall. Gottschall. Gottschall.
Yeah.
And it's from 2012, but I don't think that it's particularly relevant. When it was written, it's a book that's looking at millennia of storytelling. So, it's not exactly like it's talking about, and the latest prime minister uses storytelling like this. Yeah. It's much more looking at the evolution of. It's not really. I guess it is partly the human brain, but it's the human brain But I would say it's the human brain in a sort of almost not spirituous, maybe a more holistic way than. Because we've both read some storytelling books that are kind of like the amygdala kicks in when you experience this feeling, and and they're talking about the prefrontal cortex and all this stuff. Whereas this book is kind of talking a bit more about how it makes you feel, or what we experience, and things like that.
Cultural stuff too, which I found quite interesting. It does talk quite a lot about sort of human evolution as well, doesn't it? So it's talking about why and how we tell stories through over time.
Yeah, and it's reassuring, because I don't think anything in this book was news to me, perhaps, but in the sense of like, oh my god, I'd never even considered that. But it was very good in terms of sort of shining a spotlight chapter by chapter on different things, and going, have you really considered this in this much depth? Have you really considered this in this much depth? And I think a really good example of that would be, we both made the note that in chapter 2, he's talking about storytelling, this writer, but not specifically storytelling in terms of stand up with your storytelling hat on and tell a story, and not specifically in terms of how books are written, but he's talking about all story. So that's story in TV, story when we tell anecdotes, stories in terms of like our own memories and how we put all that together, and also
story in play.
And so that's where I was going. So story in play is what the chapter 2 is focused on, And he has a really interesting, I don't know if you would remember, he has a really interesting sort of look on gender and story.
Yeah, I really picked up on that. I thought that was really interesting. And he talks about Vivian Gustin-Paley, which we did a whole podcast on one of her books, didn't we? So he talked about her research and how she was kind of disappointed in perhaps the way that she was managing her classroom, because girls and boys seemed to be interacting in very gender-based play. So the girls would be in the home corner rocking baby dolls to sleep, and the boys would be like tearing around being superheroes with guns and stuff. And she was like, okay, this doesn't strike me as right. I should do something. I should kind of investigate it. I can't remember what she actually did for her. I don't know what her approach was.
From what I remember, this is where it becomes interesting, because she was saying that she swapped the toys and said, the boys need to play in this area for a bit and the girls need to play in this area. But their play didn't change. So the girls had bricks, but they used the bricks to make houses for imaginary children. And the boys had dolls, but they used them like grenades, or they did something stereotypical with them. But what I thought was interesting was that she went on to say that sort of boy play, in air quotes, was in some ways, I kind of got the impression that she found it uncomfortable to watch. She didn't like it. There's something unpleasant about seeing acts of war and violence and suffering acted out, and that she was like, okay, not really okay with that. But then when she drilled down a little bit into the girls' play, and I'm using quotes here again, she then discovered that on the surface level, you would go, the boys' play is very rough and tumble and misery and war and death, and the girls' play is playing houses and doing this. But when she listened and tuned into what the girls were playing, it was that the dolls didn't have a baby, they didn't have a parent, and so someone had to look after them. Or the house, the house was going to get, I was going to say foreclosed on because they couldn't pay the mortgage, but that's quite advanced.
Or someone had like stolen the baby and they needed to get them back, and it was all. Yeah, and I love the way that he then kind of extended that kind of research and observation into observations about story generally, which is that it's all about trouble. So human stories are always about some kind of trouble. So even though, as you say, the girls' play looked all very nice and calm and friendly, there was always some kind of trouble going on, whether that be domestic or otherworldly. Amongst this kind of domestic scene on the surface, there was always trouble brewing, and that our brains sort of have that natural inclination to make stories about trouble. And the other bit I found was interesting was the stuff he was talking about dreams, and saying about dreaming, and all the various research that's been done into the reason for dreaming, but that dreams are always about some kind of trouble that has to be overcome. It's some kind of problem that's happened. And that bit about animals, whether animals dream, and the guy in Paris who rounded up loads of stray cats.
Pascal's cats. What an absolute! I love human history just because anywhere you go into it, there's stuff, because my view is that human history is a progression of compassion, right? We've started out as like murder, death, evil, monkeys kill the other monkeys, and slowly we have developed more and more compassion and empathy.
Have you read Steven Pinker? No. The Better Angels of Our Nature is about that, basically. You'd love it. You should really read it.
But anyway, so this Pascal's cats guy, can I just explain the story roughly?
I wanted to.
Go on then.
Just because I'm fascinated by the idea of but he basically gave cats a lobotomy, didn't he? He severed the bits of the
but not a good lobotomy. Make it clear that they said he rounded up hundreds of cats and he cut random bits out until he found the bit that worked.
Yeah. So the bit that he was looking for was the bit that, so when we're dreaming, our brains are dreaming so vividly, and they've done the brain scans and stuff, that they can tell that we are living through the dream as though it were real in our brains. We are kind of reacting in the same ways as if it was real, except that, of course, we don't move when we're sleeping. Apart from just rolling over and stuff. Yeah, so there's a thing that happens in our brain when we're dreaming, which kind of shuts down the physical movement in response to what's going on. So if you're in running away, you're not actually pretend running in bed. And he speculates, or the research who found this out speculated, that it's so that we don't like punch our cave dwelling family members in the head while we're asleep. So he was looking to cut out that bit of the brain that prevented that from happening, so that the cats would move while they were dreaming. And so he did that, and then he observed them in like a glass box. This is right, isn't it? And so they've got their eyes open, but they're non-responsive to the outside world. So they're living in their dream world.
He was like waving food in front of them. He was flicking his eyes and poking them in the eyes and stuff. And they didn't respond. They didn't, but they would respond to what appeared to be imaginary stimulus. So they would run away, they would cower, for no particular reason.
And so he speculated that's their dreams, and that even in cat dreams, it's all about trouble. It's all about like, I've got to get the food, or I've got to defend my territory, or I've got to run away, or I've got to, it's not just like lounging in the sun. They didn't
ever do it and just lie there and purr. They were always experiencing some sort of strife.
Yes.
But there's an interesting bit, I'm not sure how much further you got after that, where he posits the theory, this author, that when we are dreaming, our brains are basically doing a defrag of all the information, of not just, this is what happened to me today, but your brain is making all kinds of random connections through the day, some of which are relevant and some of which aren't. So like, it could be that, you smell bread, and you also smelt bread when you were 5 and your mum slammed the door. And so your brain immediately connects them, but then at the end of the day, it has to go, no, and pull them apart. But he's saying that our brains are so hardwired for story and making sense of the world through story, that he posits that that's why we have that's why dreams seem mental, because you have a thought about your PE teacher, and you have a thought about giving a speech, and you have a thought about clothing, and your brain can't just have them as abstract thoughts come in your head. It has to be, well, my PE teacher wanted me to give a speech and I had to do it in stripy purple patch, because your brain just can't let them go.
Like that bit that he says about the patients with kind of medical or like medical issues with their brain, where they did an action like got up and turned a buzzer off, or got up and picked up a pint of milk or whatever, and then he said, why did you do that? And they just straight away came out with a story that was complete rubbish, but they had to invent the story.
That's a different thing he's talking about there. So he is talking there about literally right brain and left brain, and saying
that's right.
If you split the brain in half, the right brain can perceive words and knowledge and stuff. So like, it can choose an image off a screen, but if you then ask the person why they picked it, only their left brain can respond verbally. So your left brain will make up a story. That's right. So it was like the right brain you have to flip it, don't you? So the left eye could see a picture of a beach, and the right eye could see a picture of a school or something. But then the right brain picks a thing of a sandcastle. And then they ask the person, why did you pick a sandcastle? And they say something like, when I was at school, we had to build castles as a project. And so I saw the picture of the school and I thought about building a castle.
Right.
And they've just, in a split second, have made up this story because you can't just go, well, I don't know. I can't explain that. And he also goes on further and says that is one of the benefits of, now I have to word this very carefully because he does it very carefully. I'm going to say it's the benefits of a belief system or a religion, in that the world is incredibly scary if you can't connect the dots. So any story that connects the dots makes your brain happier. And so I'm trying to say that very delicately, because I'm not for a second trying to challenge anyone's faith there. I'm just saying that is one of the things that people have observed, is that when you have he was interesting that there's one bit where he's talking about people who read more fiction. I can't remember where that is in the book, whether you would have got there, and saying that people who read more fiction have stronger worldviews on social etiquette. So he's saying that in the same way that dreams and play are practice at navigating socially difficult things, people who read lots of fiction also have this reinforced thing of, it's basically like, he talks a bit about virtual reality and saying that stories are the original virtual reality. Now we put a pilot in a, you don't say, here, go and land this 747. We put them in simulators and we go, right, imagine this goes wrong. Imagine this goes wrong. Well, not even imagine. You put them in the simulator and it goes wrong, and they then deal with it. And so he is saying that storytelling is evolutionarily virtual reality, because it is all of us trying to prepare ourselves by going, imagine a creepy old woman in the woods offers you sweets. This is, you need to be prepared. But
her name is Gemma, and just avoid her. That's interesting that you say that, because in the introduction to the other book that I read, it's an introduction by another author, and it talks about a peace researcher called Elise Boulding, who suggested that the more vividly that we can imagine our preferred futures, the more likely we are to act out and recreate that future. So they're kind of describing why storytelling is so important, and they're taking it a step beyond just reading fiction. They are literally talking about like sitting on the lap or at the feet of an adult, and as a young person or a child, listening to the story with all the intonation and the facial expression and all of those things that help you sort of with the meaning, and the feel and the emotions that you're feeling inside in response to all of these stimuli. And exactly as you're describing, being a practice, being it's really old, isn't it? It's from Aristotle, that idea of like being able to kind of ingest a story and imagine that you're part of it, and to get that sense of catharsis and all the rest of it. But I really like that as a kind of way of expressing it, that the more your imagination is stimulated through fiction or through storytelling, then your imagination becomes stronger, and you're better able to imagine a future that you think is good, and the more able you are to act upon that. I thought that was really powerful way of saying it.
There's a really interesting book that sort of challenges this. It doesn't overtly challenge it, but at the end of the book it kind of leaves you with some stuff, and it is saying that so it ties into this religion thing and says that one of the benefits of, I'm going to say social storytelling, that's not a phrase that's in the book, but I think people understand if you say social storytelling, or is that social storytelling?
I don't know. What do you mean?
What's the one that it's an education thing now? Emotional social stories.
Social stories, like for autism.
Yeah, for all children to go. Little Timmy saw a bike that he really wanted, and it wasn't his. And he took the bike, and blah blah blah. Anyway, so they're talking about that, and they're saying that one of the benefits of that, particularly for humans and working, and that we have the biggest social network, is that in storytelling, if you can impress upon people the same values and expectations, and that then becomes a culture, doesn't it? Storytelling, I think, is one of the things that defines a culture, is what stories do they tell.
Yeah.
Because he then says that is a benefit when you are out hunting, because if I know how you're going to behave, and you know how I'm going to behave, because we've all listened to the same stories, and because we've got the same social expectation, and I know that you're not going to steal from me because we've both listened to the same thing and all this stuff. And he's saying that is really useful.
Well, that's the
in
same
terms of just getting on.
Society, yeah. I mean,
yes, but this is where I want to say that it's challenging at the end, is because we have become so culturally connected and mixed now. I think he doesn't say this in the book, but I think it's one of the a really good advocate and a really good example of why we need stories from other cultures. Because if you only listened to stories from the 1500 to 1600 in Great Britain or in Europe, you would only pick up and develop the values that were important to people in the 15 to 1600s in Europe. Are you following me on this train of thought? Whereas now, to culturally understand the people that we meet, we need a lot more viewpoints to go, okay, but you're kind of working from this Western point of view where, you know,
I kind of know what you mean. I do know what you mean, and I appreciate that. However, I would challenge that by saying that if you're looking at like ancient stories and folktales, so I've been reading recently a book, and I forgot it's something called like The World of Fairy Tales or whatever, but I'll have to look up who edited it and wrote it, and it's got these amazing I think he's Czechoslovakian illustrations. It's like it's from the 60s. It's incredible. And it's this collection of folktales from around the world, and you know the kind of cataloguing of world folktales. They you know the type B156 or whatever, and how ancient some of those tales are, hundreds if not thousands of years old, and how similar they are. So I kind of know what you mean on one level in terms of like cultural understanding, but on the other thing, you could say that actually if you're talking about the bare bones of stories, they're remarkably similar the world over, even at times when you think, could that story have actually travelled, or has that story actually grown organically in that place on planet Earth and in this other place on planet Earth?
I think
the bones are the same, you know. So there's a kind of human value there that I think kind of goes beyond culture. And in this therapeutic storytelling book, the author is Australian but has spent a lot of time travelling and doing research and storytelling all over the world. And so she kind of talks about that quite a lot, and quite a lot of the example stories in there are based on stories that she's heard in South Africa or in China or wherever, but they all share these kind of like, I guess you've got a kind of compassionate human morals, so that sort of transcends local culture. I would say
I agree. I think what I was talking about was perhaps a more niche and a more shallow level. You know, I would agree that most storytelling has some kind of idea of, if you're nice, it'll be nice, you know, look after yourself, all those kind of things that are what, you know, all humans need those things to get by. But I wonder, it did make me think about, so, you know, sometimes you and I will you know, part of what we do is that we dig out stories from other places, or, you know, I'm quite fond of finding old stories from different places, and, you know, culturally, you know, sometimes you and I will go, I've got this really good story, and officially, if you like, in air quotes, it goes like this, you know, the beats are, this happens and this happens and this happens, and you go, but that ending isn't right, is it? And what I think you and I mean when we say that is that's culturally not what we want to happen, or what we, so, you know, there's a lot of ancient stories.
It's not what our group needs.
Yes. That's what I'm. Yes,
because you might think, you might go, well, I would tell that story with its original ending to a group of adults in a cultural evening in a museum with a glass of wine as a, like, you know, interesting thing. But my group right now in the woods, consisting of these people who are here, they don't need to hear that ending right now. If that's going to do kind of more harm than good, that's going to leave a nasty taste or an unsatisfactory ending.
Or even just sometimes you have characters who, you know, you and I have often picked apart stories and we go, there isn't a good enough reason for her to be doing that, or that, you know, that seems, you know, I don't know what, you know. And sometimes you can play it off when you're storytelling, can't you? When you can just like jokingly go, and of course we all know that when someone gives you a fish, you bonk them on the head and say, thank you, Simon. And like stuff like that, where you can just play, you can sort of sneak that through.
But if you break the fourth wall, and
but if you unpick it, you are really going, this is not culturally what you want to happen, and I'm acknowledging that and making it funny, you know. And that's one of the interesting things about storytelling, is once you dig into it, this is why I think I find storytelling so interesting, is there's so much power in storytelling that I think a lot of people miss, because if you're not in the hippy dippy world that we're in, you might view storytelling as holding up the book and reading the words to the group of children or the group of people,
or not even realizing that you're storytelling all the time, which is what I liked about the storytelling animal book, is that it reminds, and this book does the same, it sort of highlights that actually when you are talking to your kids, for example, about a memory of what you did when you were their age, or when you talk about a funny thing, oh, remember when we went to that place and we did that thing and that happened and Daddy fell into the pond, that counts as storytelling. And even I saw a thing last night about which kind of ties into what you were saying about religion, about how capitalism is propped up by stories that we create within our own families. For example, why does Bobby get more pocket money than me, Mummy? Because he's older. And that being like a story about authority and bosses and subservience and financial reward for authority, the hierarchy. The hierarchy. And that just like blew my mind. I was like, oh my God. So even that kind of counts as storytelling. Like, you are, as you say, spreading that kind of cultural idea.
You're making sense of the world.
Yeah.
You're trying to connect two dots that are unrelated. Yeah. One is Bobby gets more money. Two is Bobby is older. And you're just putting a because in there, and then that it's like there's that experiment, isn't there? And I can't remember what it is. Well, there's two. There's one is where you go. For example, a lady ate a sandwich. The man hit his dog. The umbrella broke, and immediately you make that into a story, because those are three unrelated sentences. And as I was telling you those three sentences, it was really hard for me not to make the third one contingent. I just immediately did it. And then the other one is, have you heard, or I'm sure you have through your drama stuff, there was a very famous sort of study that was done where they had a film of an actor making a completely neutral face. Yeah. And then they showed audiences like something disgusting. So the film was so like someone being sick and then this neutral actor's face. And it was someone kissing and then this neutral actor's face. And depending on what the film was that preceded it, they perceived exactly the same clip as showing disgust or romance or lust, or it's entirely put on. And I do think that kind of brings me on to one of the next note that I have, which is, I'm sure you have heard of this idea that when we laughing as an action is a social cue, right? It's saying to everyone in the group, I understand why this is funny. I'm in on the joke, if you like. Mm-hmm. You with me there?
Yeah.
And so there's a part in this book where he's saying that one of the really important bits of storytelling is the communal aspect, because when we all sit around, if I go, and this happens, and when I listened to this bit of the book, I went, oh my God, I have seen that happen, right? So you're telling a story, and I'm sure most people have done this. You're telling a story, and you get to a bit, and you go like, you're just playing with the story, and you go, and then he pooed right into the monkey's bag, right? And you look at someone, right? And so you've immediately laughed there, okay, because it's hilarious.
With a snort, with a small snort.
Yes, right. But you must have experienced the same thing where, like, laughing because you get, that's a bad example because it's laughing again. But let's say I go, and the old man took that money when the little girl wasn't looking, right? Now, you tell that one of our kindergarten days, the old man took the bag when the girl wasn't looking. One child goes, oh, what a naughty man. And it, like a ripple, the social expectation moves through the group that they didn't before. They might have just gone, oh, he's taking the bag. But because someone goes, you homogenize, you communally are going, don't we all agree that's bad? Yes, we all agree that's bad. And so I have always thought about storytelling and thought, one of the reasons that I don't think I can do storytelling well through a video or through a podcast or something is because I need to see people's faces to get that feedback back. Yeah, and we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
But what I don't
reactions, because that will affect how you then deliver your next line, or whether you even say that next line, Absolutely.
But what I don't think I'd appreciated before was that all of the listeners at our storytelling sessions in the woods are getting something from each other. It's not just a one source of this and me delivering it out to all of them, that I'm going to pick random names. That Tommy is getting something because he's listening to how James is reacting, and Sarah is getting something because James is going to jump at a different bit. Or
and especially in our groups where it's, never do they all sit in silence and listen unless it's.
I think of it as more as a pub
Yeah, and then
bit rowdy.
Yes, and it's not like we don't tell a story in the way where now everyone be quiet. Yeah, I am the storyteller. It's more like we're on a kind of even playing field, and especially I was thinking of like our Saturday groups, and you can think of the characters I'm being.
I know who you're talking about.
I'll feel very comfortable to just chuck in an idea or a response or character.
Just start being the character. To just get up. Yeah. You say like he got on his horse and immediately that person has jumped up next to you and is now pretending to ride a horse, and you're like, well, okay.
And delivering probably quite a funny and spot on line in role as the character as well, just to give a bit of dialogue and a bit of flavour. So yeah, of course they are. And like when we know instinctively that storytelling in forest school helps kind of bond that group together, and especially with perhaps a new group that don't know each other particularly well or don't know you particularly well. And are new to forest school. I've definitely found that with groups in schools, for example. Like I genuinely do not think I could have run the groups that I did in schools without storytelling. And as soon as I kind of hit on how important that was, I think I maybe ran 1 or 2 sessions right at the beginning without it. Or it was a bit more of an afterthought. Like it was like, oh, we'll just do that at the end and just take 10 minutes.
Well, sometimes you just see it as a way in. You just see it as a like, oh, I'll tell that story because then they'll be interested in den building, or I'll tell that story, rather than seeing it as a valuable activity.
Yeah, and then you realise what a profound effect it has on the kind of the bonds between the group members and between you and the place as well. So especially if you start involving, elements of the place where you are. So at the moment this is happening in nature, or this has happened recently, so I'm going to tell a story about birds, or I'm going to there's been a lot of rain, so I'm going to tell a story about that, or whatever, which I think we often do, don't we? We try and always, it's the stories that we pick aren't random, they're there sort of for a reason. But I'm really interested in that kind of working out the sort of science really about why it is a bonding experience, because it is instinct. We know it is, and that's our instinct that it is. But I'm kind of interested in the comments you're making about.
Again, it does, doesn't it? It tells you so much about a group dynamic that it might take you a really long time to get otherwise. Whereas if I think about going into a school and doing some storytelling, I've done some storytelling with groups, but I've done it, say, 2 or 3 weeks in, or 4 weeks in even. And then have kicked myself for going, God, why didn't I do this at the start? Because if I'd done this at the start, and you could almost create a story that was almost like a questionnaire, but not a questionnaire, like a bit where you'd go, okay, there's a bit of immature humour in my story. There's also a bit of peril in my story. There's also a bit of this in my story. And then you could watch it and you could go, okay, poo jokes don't work with you guys, but there's a group of children over here who are very scared when I talked about the dragon, so maybe there's something there to be thinking about. There's some boys here who immediately wanted to get up and be the soldiers when the soldiers were in the story, so I think there's something there. Do you know what I mean? You could get a group from week 1 and go, right, just going to tell you the story. I'm going to gauge your reactions from it, and from there I will know what's going on,
Yeah.
Can I talk about, he talks about, I can't remember what the official name, not the official name. He talks in the book about, it's called like paper characters, or like ink people.
Ink people, yeah.
Ink people, which I absolutely loved. So ink people, he's talking about characters that do not exist and narratives that never happened, but their impact on the world is measurable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did you get this? I can't remember.
I did, but you'll have to remind me.
Okay.
I remember.
So I'm going to talk through 3 examples which I think are all really interesting. So the first one is the American Civil War. There were 2 books, and I cannot remember the name of them now, which is awful. But essentially, they were books written in the north of America, which portrayed a very brutal slave master.
Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Tom's Cabin, yes, well remembered. And
yes, amazing.
Yes. So, really egging on this character that the slave owner was this horrible person, and that the freedom of this person was absolutely important and paramount, which is not a story that happened. It was a story that happened. Obviously, lots of people went through that, but that particular story wasn't true.
Yeah, Eliza escaping being a slave.
Now they then talk about this. This was something like one of the best-selling books at the time in Britain, and Britain's interests at the time were heavily linked with the slave trade and cotton and everything that was going on in the south of America. But they can attribute an amount of public opinion that was moved by this book that then meant that Britain didn't enter the American Civil War.
Yeah.
Because they then were transformed by, well, we can't be on the side of that horrible slave owner. We as a country will stay out, and it plays out. The South of America loses the war. The North carries on, and all this stuff. And Britain, because they didn't step in, has an effect. It's a story that didn't happen. Alexander the Great. Do you remember this bit?
No.
I love Alexander the Great. He is one of the most mental people in the world. He was told his entire life that he was actually a demigod. That his mum was born of like the line of Perseus, and that his dad was, I think I'm getting this right, was like, so his mum's family descended from Perseus and his dad's family descended from Hercules. And he spent literally his entire life with his mum telling him that is actually true. That is not a, wouldn't it be nice, that he grows up with that story being his reality.
Yeah.
And it's only because of that he goes off, conquers the known world, eventually drinks himself into a paranoid stupor and is poisoned. But again, shapes the world. Last one. Apparently Hitler, when he was a child, was essentially babysat by the Wagner family. Do you get this bit?
I didn't hear that he was babysat. I heard that he went to this concert and had this amazing revelation. He went to a Wagner concert.
Oh, I think they were family friends.
Oh, right.
At least they were, yeah. But anyway, that there is, this story about the wolf of Germany, and that the wolf will bring this back. And they said that, Hitler was obviously very into his art, and he believed that he was the wolf of Germany, and that he was going to bring this all back. And sorry, just as a side note from my music degree, did you know that there was, Wagner's Ring Cycle?
Yeah.
So did you know that there was a plan to demolish, I think it's half of Berlin, in order to build one concert theatre with a massive estate grounds, because Wagner had such massive ideas that he was like, to put my play on properly, it needs gardens and carriages and walkways and everything else. And Hitler was apparently on board with it.
Wow,
with like,
amazing.
That's how important they thought Wagner's work was.
Yeah, I don't know much about Wagner apart from, have you watched Curb Your Enthusiasm?
I haven't, no.
Oh, it's very, very funny. Larry David is obviously Jewish, and it's all about like really icky social situations. So it's a mockumentary, like following him about and his little kind of stupid arguments with his friends and so on. And one of them is all about Wagner, and should he or should he not like go to a Wagner concert because he's Jewish? And Wagner is like the ultimate symbol of anti-Semitism and all of it. Yeah.
It's I mean, that's a side topic, isn't it? Can you separate an author from their views, from their work? And that's maybe not something to be doing with limited time left in a podcast.
I think I've got that wrong anyway. I think it's more like he's judging somebody because, I can't remember, someone's listening to Wagner and they're trying to work out if that means there's something like that.
Stephen Fry has said on many interviews that he is conflicted because of Wagner's views, but he finds Wagner's music to be the most beautiful music in the world. And he struggles then because Stephen Fry's family are, I think I'm right in saying, Hungarian to some extent. Stephen Fry is openly gay, and he's kind of like, this person would have persecuted me doubly so, and would have hated me and would have seen me as the absolute scum of the earth, but I love his music. So can I listen to, it's very interesting, isn't it? But the point that we're talking about storytelling is this idea that a story can have real world implications. And I think, not to scale it back, because I gave 3 examples there from the book, which are quite epic in proportions, but that's because you want epic proportion ones. But if you scale it down, and I think about how many children have we influenced their lives with a story?
Yeah, I know.
And how many of us, and not even like a story of like, do you know what, I really do believe I am Peter in Peter and the Wolf. I really believe I am Hercules or whatever. But just in terms of, every time you tell a story, you're imparting some sort of social expectation and narrative.
Absolutely. And that is exactly what the book that I've read is about.
Okay.
That is exactly what it's about. So it first of all begins called Therapeutic Storytelling by Susan Perrow, and it starts off by just making the case, like we've been speaking about how important storytelling is and story in general. And then it talks about how stories affect us. And in this particular book, so she's written a previous book called Healing Stories for Challenging Behaviour.
Oh, I have that book. I didn't realise it was the same person.
There you go. So she is specifically talking about how stories can change us, and in this book, how they can heal us. So she's talking about how that effect kind of happens, but also about how you might go about writing a story for a child or a person for whom something is out of balance. And I really like the way that she uses that phrase. So she's not talking about like you've got a child presenting naughty behavior and you need to change their naughty behavior by giving them like a good moralizing tale to like change them and label their behavior as naughty and make them realize that she's like, it's absolutely not about that, but it is about recognizing that for this child something is out of balance, whether that be that they are being really aggressive in their play and hurting their peers, or that they're very shy and introverted and just won't take part in any play, or they're having a really hard time at home because their parents are separating, any of these kind of like real world social problems that can happen for children. And that how you might then take that thing that's out of balance and create a story for them using metaphor. And she talks quite a lot about metaphor in general and how it's basically been the kind of like key, it's played this huge role in human culture, which is very similar to what you've been talking about with the other book. And so take this really powerful kind of tool of metaphor and create this story for this child, which has a kind of resolution and doesn't necessarily go, and then so for example, she gives the example of a child who is like really aggressive and rough in their play and hurt other children, which was not good for anybody, obviously not good for the other children, not good for the child who was doing it because he then became kind of excluded and isolated. And she gives this example where she's like, well, traditionally in school, a teacher might get all the children on the mat and go, hurting our friends is wrong. If we hit our friends, they won't be our friends anymore, and then we'll be really lonely, and that's really horrible.
And then you'll die alone.
So we don't do that. Yeah. So she says, well, that that approach isn't it's not going to capture anyone's imagination. It's just going to invite interruptions of like, yeah, well, so and so does that all the time. Yeah, they do actually. Well, how about when blah blah blah? And she's like, that's not the right way to go about it. It's shaming the children that are doing it. It's moralizing. It's preaching. It's lecturing. Where she gives an example of a child who was presenting with this behavior, and she created a therapeutic story for him about an elephant. And an elephant's trunk being like really, really strong, and this young elephant called Tembo like playing with his trunk, but all of his other young elephants being scared of him because he was just like bashing and thrashing stuff with his strong trunk all the time, and they were really scared. So he was like knocking down trees and smacking them and all the rest of it through his kind of rough play with his strong trunk. And then as the story goes along, something like Tembo falls down a hole or something, and then the grandmother elephant calls all the other elephants to help, and with their strong trunks they pull him out of the hole and he's safe and he gets to play with his friends. So through that example of that story, she's saying you're not kind of taking their behavior and making it right, and therefore that's what you should do. But through metaphor, it's showing you we can use our strength to hurt, or we can use our strength to help. And so the elephants later on in the story use their strength to help. And so that's it's just offering an alternative. You might
it occurs to me. Go on, sorry.
You might, so, and she's pretty confident that through this kind of methodology and this approach, that it does profoundly change children's behaviour. Maybe not immediately, but has some kind of like deep kind of intrinsic effect on children. So rather than going, oh, I've stopped doing that behaviour because so and so told me to do it, that this metaphor kind of gets into your soul almost and has this kind of healing effect to restore balance. And it's quite interesting. And she's very good at, like, as you're reading it, you're kind of going, that sounds kind of manipulative. And then the next paragraph, she's like, this is absolutely not manipulative. This is not what I mean. Like, this is an example of what would be manipulative. And what my approach isn't that. And, and don't suggest like fairy tale happy ever after endings. Don't, she kind of gives you the sense that you have this amazing responsibility as a storyteller. You've got this captive audience, hopefully. And your stories have a profound, potential for affecting the listeners. And so it's, you've got to be really careful, especially if you're writing stories for particular children or groups, that you don't go, and then the parents got back together and lived happily ever after. And that was, and it was all fine. It's all about being real. And but that the endings should always be like fair and just. So we have that responsibility. So she says, she talks, this is, you mentioned when we were talking about this podcast in advance, you were saying about maybe there's another chance for us to have another talk about like choosing stories for groups.
How do we pick our stories?
And so she kind of talks about like picking themes and sort of story journeys for different ages of children, but she's very clear. She's like, we shouldn't shy away from strong stories. A good story is going to have at some part, that battle between good and evil, or that really difficult choice, or that big problem to overcome, and we shouldn't shy away from those. But since we're working with children, it's our job to kind of make sure that the endings restore balance, are fair, are just, and are positive, because they're so powerful. That she gives lots of little anecdotes of either parents or teachers or these like amazing kind of mentor figures who are working with really deprived children in South Africa. And she gives lots of examples of people who've got it wrong, who've come to her and said, my child, like, I really needed some time one-to-one with my husband, and I really wanted my daughter to go and watch telly, just so that I could have this. I really needed some one-to-one time with my husband. And so I sent her off to watch telly, and she came in and she said the telly was scary, and I saw a bear on her t-shirt, and I said, well, you know what, that bear on your t-shirt, it will protect you. It's a magic bear, and it'll protect you, so it stops things being scary. Go back and watch telly. And then the girl came back going, the bear isn't working. She's like, that is an absolute, like, that is not what that is what not to do. You're not kind of dismissing children's fears or this kind of thing. So she gives lots of examples like that throughout, where people have tried it and they've missed the point.
Can I posit something that is just because it's fresh in my mind, and as you were describing that, I wondered. So I have been listening to, it's very secondhand, but I was talking to you about it before, that I've been listening to a podcast talking about a book, and now I'm on a podcast talking about a book, talking about a podcast, talking about a book. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so the book is called The Geography of Thought, How Asians and Westerners Think Differently and Why. It's a very interesting book. But it touches on storytelling in a way that I think is relevant here, because in terms of storytelling and retelling, it is more common in Asian culture at multiple levels. So if you ask somebody, according to this book, if you ask somebody about an embarrassing incident, a Westerner is more likely to retell the story as, I was walking along and I tripped over and then all the people laughed at me, right? And they're saying that it's a much more common Asian way would be to say, they saw me walking along and then they saw me fall down and then they saw me, they thought that was funny. The whole story is told from as many perspectives as you can get. And equally, they were saying that if you ask a Western child about their birthday party, or even just Western adults, I think it was, they describe a sequence of events and actions that they did on their birthday. If you ask someone from an Asian culture, they're more likely to say, well, I was having a cake. Nanny and Granddad were in the kitchen and they were talking about this, and Mummy and they were talking about this in this whole. They would talk about it in a whole three-dimensional way. And Asian storytelling follows that idea that perhaps, I'm going to really tread lightly here, that perhaps they have a deeper requirement for empathy because so he puts it down partly to this idea that the way crops are harvested. So in Western cultures, and particularly ancient Greek, you can afford to be a loner because you make your money on your farm and you make your money by trading goods and whatever. So if you disagree with someone, great, you will go home and you make your money, they make their money, doesn't matter. But because of the way rice is harvested, everyone needs to knit together. There isn't room to disagree. So that then follows into storytelling needs to impart into the culture this strong idea of empathy, and that you are not the main character in this story. There are other viewpoints, there are other parts. So what I was wondering...
Do you know the word solipsistic? It's one of my favourite words. The opposite. We're solipsistic. Yeah, go on.
So what I was wondering was, it would be very interesting to know, anybody that's worked in Asian cultures or with... I say Asian cultures because that's geographically, they could be wherever. But whether this idea of social stories needs, it has the same weight with those children and those learners, because as you were describing that story about the elephant, it was all from the elephant's viewpoint, wasn't it? And like we were saying that,
no, it isn't actually.
Well, but the idea being that we're supposed to empathize and imagine that we are the elephant, and that we have been doing, we have been bashing everyone with our trunks and everyone else is going to help us. Whereas I wonder if an Asian way of telling a story would have automatically included, other children being hurt, and other children were sad. They were sad because they saw this big elephant hitting them with their trunks.
I think that's probably the way that I'm kind of retelling it.
But I just positing it as a thought and as a kind of like, the idea of social storytelling is almost an inversion of Western storytelling, because it is saying, think about other people, you absolute narcissist. And I wonder if you have a storytelling culture that emphasizes, multiple perspectives on an event, do you ever need that? Or, do you know what I mean? It's just an interesting way of
I wonder if that is true of like just the way that it's told, so like the authorial voice, or whether that is the content as well. Do you know what I mean? I'd be interested to know that. So our Western story is more about an individual and their quest or their goal, and our Asian story is more about a community or a group of people. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's much more common in a Western story. I think it's much more common to have lots of insight into one character's mind, and even a story told in the third person, you don't get as much depth into the secondary character's emotions. You get it through inference, don't you? You get it through. It's in my head. I'm thinking about the Harry Potter books, and I'm thinking, do you ever get as much insight into, say, Ron and Hermione's minds as you do into Harry's? And you definitely don't. So I wonder if an Asian way of telling stories would have all three of those perspectives. But then, so I wonder if that's what makes. I'm just going off on a little like world of my own now, because so if you haven't read Game of Thrones, have you? The Song of Ice and Fire. So they're really interesting books because geographically, so each chapter is told from the first person, but it's told by the first person of a different character. So there's about 3,000 characters in it, but there's probably about 20 characters that we see inside their heads. And so for this entire chapter, we only see it through Tyrion's head, and we only know what he knows. And then and then in the next chapter we're only seeing it through Joffrey's viewpoint, and we only know what he knows.
There's an amazing book by Jonathan Franzen called The Corrections, which is kind of like, in terms of its setting, basically the opposite of Game of Thrones. It's really domestic, and it's about a family in America with
Is it hyper-realism?
It basically is. But it's the same format, so each chapter is told from the perspective of one of the characters. And so only at the end, when you get all of the characters' perspectives on this particular time, do you get it, because all the pieces slot together, and it's just the story of, being alive and being part of a family. But it's devastating. It's absolutely devastating.
What is so this is bringing up a horrible memory of GCSE English for me, and you might have done this as an English teacher. The play An Inspector Calls.
Oh God, yeah.
It is the most heavy-handed. So for people who are fortunate enough to have not read it, basically, like, someone is murdered and an inspector brings them into brings his family. He's like, so you're all suspected of murder, blah blah blah, and he interviews them one by one, and it turns out that, like, they all think they murdered him, and it's like, but they don't realize it because they tell their story one person at a time. So it's like, I fired him, and I fired him in a really mean way. And then the next person's like, I saw him on the road and I didn't help, and blah, blah, blah. And then, they're like, in a way, aren't you all the murderer? And then, I think I'm remembering this right, that at the end, he goes like, aren't you all the murderer? And he leaves. And then there's a knock at the door, and he goes like, and a new character goes, hello, I'm the inspector. I'm here to conduct the investigation. And they're like, then who was that other guy? What a crazy world. Isn't the play crazy? Like, it's the most, like, by the time you get to the end of the book, you're just like, I hate this. I hate this so much.
It's interesting that you bring up GCSE English, because I was going to bring it up earlier when you were talking about kind of stories, the ink people thing, and the ability of stories to, change your worldview and open your eyes to certain things. And for two reasons. So that thing is about, like, stories from other cultures. So I don't know if when you were at school you had to study the anthology of, like, poems from other cultures. Do you remember that?
I don't remember doing it. If I did, I apologise to my teachers.
But there was, like, it was basically like that labeling of cultures as other. So a lot of these poets that we were studying lived in Britain, but their names were Imtiaz Darker or whatever.
Sorry, I did. Yeah. Is that did it have a book? Did it have a poem about being half caste?
Yes.
I remember that.
John Agard.
I went to see him in Bristol.
Oh, amazing!
He's
such a legend.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah. So I think they did change it to, like, different cultures, or maybe it's the other way around. Anyway, it was just like, so heavy-handed and clunky. But Of Mice and Men, did you do that? Did you do Of Mice and Men? So that's off the curriculum now. That's a Govism of, like, chuck that out. We need some more dead white British male authors. We need more Dickens, and chuck out. We haven't got time for Of Mice and Men. Of course, schools can teach what they like. You can choose to teach Of Mice and Men, except you flipping can't, because there's not a second of time left in your schedule when you're designing your schemes of work to fit in anything that isn't on the bloody list to prep them for the exam. So it's out. But that was one of those. Yeah, sorry. This is why I told you that my old boss in my leaving speech was like, yeah, Gemma's leaving. If you want to see her get really angry, just talk to her about education. It's hilarious. Okay, bye, Gemma. So I'm getting back into my old world.
But we have legitimately, like, made a small form of entertainment where I sort of poke you about education. So in some ways, your old head was right.
Yeah, she is.
It's entertaining.
But yeah, Of Mice and Men was one of those stories that every time I taught it, I bloody loved it, because
I really liked it. Yeah.
You just find, like, it was absolutely perfectly pitched for that age group, I think, and it challenged so many of their pre-held beliefs and ideas, and made them empathise with characters that they wouldn't have, and there was just so much room for discussion in there in terms of gender, race, class. Like, it was just magical for that reason, for that kind of potential to change minds. I was like, God, that's the worst thing when it was dropped. I was like, everyone should read it.
we have gone over the hour mark. I think it would be a prudent thing to, not prudent. I think it'd be really entertaining if people in our Facebook group or our want to get in touch with us. It'd be really interesting to know if you can pinpoint one or more stories that have been pivotal to you. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, this is a story I tell at forest school. It can be, War and Peace. Like, that's absolutely fine. But it would be interesting to know, because I wonder if there's some correlation between all people who are into forest school, alternative education, and listening to two nut jobs talk on a podcast, and whether we all have something. You go, all of these books, we're all convinced that we're getting that Hogwarts letter. That is what pulls us together.
Well, there was a thing on Facebook in one of the groups the other day, where somebody put a picture up from a children's picture book of, I don't know if you saw this, of like a tree, but the side facing us carved away, and you can see inside the tree all these like rooms and staircases and stuff. Did you see this?
No, I don't. On Facebook.
And it was, and everyone just went, wow! And like some people like the magical faraway tree, and the people who knew were like, no man, it's Brambley Hedge. Like, so many people were like, oh, Brambley Hedge. Oh yeah, do you know what Brambley Hedge is?
No.
It's little mice. It's like little anthropomorphized mice,
okay,
in sort of Victorian age kind of clothes, but all of the kind of
it's a bit like Sylvanian Families, but
yes,
was yeah.
Jill Barkland wrote them, and she spent ages researching for each book. So there's all the all the wildflowers that are sketched they're all real, they're all out at the right times. Do you know what I mean? They're all kind of accurate, and the mice collect seeds and store them away and eat them, all this kind of stuff. And there were a couple of people commenting on there saying that they really think that reading those books as a child inspired their love of nature and therefore led them down the path that they're now on.
Oh yeah, 100%. I am going to send you on Skype Can you see our chat? Oh.
Can I see our chat? No, I can't.
Oh, I'm going to send you a picture of Okie Doke.
Oh, yeah, Okie Doke, yeah.
So, again, Okie Doke, pivotal for me. Makes complete sense now if I think about it.
Yeah.
Like, that is everything I want to be. But, when you get a friendly hand, you need a helping hand. Ring the door. Anyway.
That's enough. Can I also talk about another theme I want to do on the pod? Pretty soon, because it's kind of timely, and I would love to get some listener input on this.
Okay.
I want to talk about what children are learning during this time of lockdown that is self-initiated. So I'm not talking about stuff that schools have sent you or nurseries have sent or whatever, and how
or that you have proffered to your children.
No, I'm talking about stuff that you have observed, probably if you're like an interested parent, carer, or forest school practitioner. You kind of have that. You've got your eye in for noticing learning that's happening.
Do you know what my 3-year-old is learning?
No.
He is learning. No, it's great. He is learning exactly how much patience I have for mundane questions. He's getting.
Why?
Anyway.
Why?
Which one is it? Which one? Which one? I'm going to go and move the car. Which one? My car. Which is your car? You know which car mine is. You've always known. It's raining outside. Which one? That doesn't make sense, son. Anyway.
No. So have you worked out what he means when he's saying which one, though?
Yes. What he means is more information, please.
Yeah.
So, I'm tuned in, and it's still difficult to interpret that way because he does ask other questions as well, and also because he sometimes shortens it to just what, and he sometimes arrives in a room where you're midway through a task and just looks at you and goes, "What?" And you're like,
"Yeah, tell me more." My little boy said one of his first kind of utterances was "da da da," which meant "what is that?" or "tell me more about it. What's going on? What's happening?" Da da da. Often accompanied by like a point at the thing that you wanted to know more about, but sometimes not. And it was so effective for him that when he could speak absolutely perfectly in like very long, complex sentences, he would still sometimes just go da da da. So it was really it was interesting that he just like kept that as a little shorthand. Just, you know what that means. It works really well every time I say da da da. It's very little effort for a lot of reward. So I'm going to carry it on. So I want to know what children are learning that you have noticed because you've got your eye in, listener. Yeah. You may even still be working in a setting, but you are just observing children. I've heard from people who are still working in obviously strange situations with fewer children than normal, vulnerable children of key workers, etc. But I have heard tell, this may not be true of all settings or most settings, but I've heard tell that they are a lot less structured, a lot more play-based. Obviously, you're trying to do a bit of social distancing if possible, but hard with children. So therefore, perhaps you have a bit more time amongst all of your hard work and anxiety. So maybe not, I don't know. But maybe you've got more time to observe what they bring. You know, maybe they're in mixed age groups where they weren't before. So what are you noticing that your kids are learning by themselves?
And very last thing before we go, is we need to say thank you to Charlie
Crump.
Because Charlie is our first Patreon supporter, which means Charlie is giving us loads. Not like the rest of you freeloaders, listen to us talk about nothing. How dare you? Charlie, we're just going to talk to you now forever. And shush everyone else, you're not allowed to listen.
Charlie. Oh, thank you, Charlie. Yeah, thank you, Charlie.
If you don't give us more money, Gemma's going to keep singing. Send more money.
Lewis, I want to donate money to the Forest School podcast. How could I do that?
It's always on the podcast.
Tell me now in your own words, because clearly the other way wasn't working.
Patreon.com.
And then what
/ Children of the Forest.
Yeah.
And then you can subscribe, and it's not, I think the lowest you can give, which is absolutely fine, is
tappy tap tap.
I'm typing it in.
Tap.
Is £1.50 a month. If you feel like Gemma and I are worth £1.50 a month,
not even the price of a pre-lockdown cup of coffee. Cheaper than that.
People have turned off now. People have gone, this is the cringy bit where they ask for money and they've turned it off. Well, good.
Good.
Anyway.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate.
Perfect. That's how we get more listeners. Okay, we're going to leave it there. I'm going to go make pizza.
Children of the Forest.
Bye, Gemma.
To show your support for the Forest School podcast.